Inspiration comes not before a task, but during it. So you can't wait to be inspired and then do something because you'll always be waiting to be inspired, and that's resistance. So it's showing up, putting in the effort, and then and then you can have these moments where he describes it, where you're lifted up, and for hours you could be working with a sense of inspiration.
Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Golden Hour, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, good to be here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, great to be back.
Kevin, well, you recently shared with me this very interesting book called The War of Art, not the Art of War. And this was something that we had gotten an email about from someone who was very interested to get our thoughts on this book. And it's a very interesting book. It's aimed specifically for artists who are encountering this kind of resistance in pursuing their art, perfecting their craft. So I thought this would be a great book for us to discuss today.
Yeah, it is. It is certainly a unique book.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever read a book similar to it. And the first time I read it I actually put it down. God, this is a ridiculous book. So,
Yeah.
And then later came back to it and saw how, in fact, there's a lot of profound insights that are there. And then I got to see that actually this is a book that's made a big impact on a lot of people. So.
Yeah, because he has this whole kind of mythology behind it of there's the muse and the genius and the ego and your true self.
It's literally a Greek mythology. Yes.
Yeah. But then when he gets to this practical advice, it's really on point. I find it's very helpful and very insightful.
Yeah. What the War of Art does more than any other book is personify resistance so that you can think of it as an enemy to be struggling against. Mm-hmm. And then as you learn to struggle against this enemy, you're actually growing in all these meaningful ways. And even learning to be docile to inspiration from on high. So it's an interesting book and the kind of but you have to get into the battle sense of it because it is called the War of Art. And the sense of battle and enemies was so strong that at first that's what turned me off. This doesn't make sense to me because it seems like he was taking parts of normal psychology and demonizing them. But then I realized that was a misread. And what he's trying to do is get people to have this super clear idea of how resistance is operating in their life.
Mm-hmm. And so what is resistance? It's kind of a mysterious, almost subconscious force. The way he describes it is you only feel resistance, or you don't precisely feel it, but you only encounter resistance when you're on the right path. So if things are all easy and it's effortless, then that's a sign that you're on the wrong path and that you need to. He describes resistance as like a compass pointing north, that when you encounter resistance, you're headed towards your North Star.
Yeah. So resistance, he sees, is this force that is trying to hold you back from succeeding in what matters most in your life. Mm-hmm. So resistance hates progress. Resistance tries to keep you stuck. Resistance is constantly at war with you, and it's the most cunning and subtle of enemies. So it shows no mercy. It's a tornado that destroys everything. So there's all these things. It's a tyrannical dictator that could not be persuaded. And so it's like all these things. It's like, okay. But when I think that this is something though relatable for us all, when we're trying to improve ourselves, or you're trying to do something that's kind of new in your life, or that is creative in any way, it can feel like everything is conspiring against you. I remember, Sharif, when you and I made the masterclass, and that it felt like every little technological glitch was just perfectly
Yeah.
timed, and then as soon as everything would be just right, then there'd be people with, I don't know, there'd be people
Like
with
an airplane coming through or a
there'd be an
helicopter,
airplane, and then there'd
dog
be a
barking outside
lawnmower,
or
and then
yeah,
there'd be a
yeah.
dog, and then turkeys, and then there's like all these things that would never, like normally, like you wouldn't notice. It reminds me of something someone said, that man's life on Earth is a ceaseless struggle against the silent malice of inanimate objects. That actually, I think that Steven Pressfield would have liked that quote.
Yeah.
That, but there is a sense that everything goes against you. And Pressfield even says that as you're making progress in life, you'll get resistance even from the people around you, that they resist progress. Like every system, in a way, resists progress. And so others, they end up like you get your buttons pushed by everyone around you. And the hardest thing is just facing up then to the resistance that we have to really putting work into what matters, to really trying to improve in ways that matter the most. So think about, like, I don't know, if you're ever trying to like increase your, like, to take on a new form of learning, or to master some new skill, that, or just writing, let's say, sitting down and facing the blank page when you write, you can feel such enormous resistance that it's hard actually to make any sense of it. But it's true that like everything conspires against you when you try to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So, bound up with this idea of resistance is the idea of calling, I think is the term that he would like. So, is this a concept that you find helpful when you're working with people, that there's just something that you are meant to do? And I mean, do people get inspired by that? I find it inspiring that, hey, there's just something that I'm on earth to achieve. And when I encounter resistance, is because I'm achieving that goal. It's not exactly a reframe. Would you call that a reframe?
It kind of is. It is, if you think of it, the meaningful path in any of our lives is not the path of least resistance. So it's actually the path of greatest resistance. And this is Pressfield's point, that the path of least resistance always takes us away from what matters most and stops us from contributing to the world what we were in some way meant to contribute. So and he thinks that, now he was on the Rich Roll podcast, at some point last, I don't know, could have been a couple of years. I don't remember exactly when it's from. And he was saying that this is even more true now with social media and basically YouTube and everything, that there is the path of least resistance has just gotten so much broader, and it's so much easier to access. So that people don't realize that they're kind of whittling away, in resistance, the time that they need to be investing in their lives to really commit to what matters. And so it's just delay, delay, delay. So the fun thing about Pressfield is that basically everything is labeled as resistance.
Yeah. The path of least resistance is resistance.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You're giving in to resistance by following the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that summarizes the book more than anything. The trap of it. So now, what I find interesting in reading the book, so if people are daring to read it, is, in your mind, replace resistance with gravity. So gravity is this force. Gravity always opposes upward progress. In my mind, that's more what he's talking about. He's not actually talking about it as a conscious, malevolent spirit that is trying to hold you back. It's just the fact is that all growth means somehow progressing higher and higher. And so as we do that, yes, we do meet, you are, like, if you're going to be climbing, you're going up against gravity. And so the path of least resistance is a downward slope. But there's something the opposite. The path of most resistance is actually this upward slope. It's like an inclined plane that each of us, if we're going to fulfill our mission in life, we have to be walking up this inclined plane. So the more you can lean into resistance, it's like a climber leaning into gravity. And so sometimes it's just a matter of hiking up a level path, more or less level. At other times it's scaling. And so, yeah, so the faster you're achieving elevation, the more you have to lean into resistance. Maybe that's what he's trying to do, is get people to wake up from this kind of life of comfort. And he's saying that basically you have to commit to life as misery.
Yeah.
So you have to embrace misery as your lot. And it's worthwhile to accomplish what is your kind of mission to accomplish on earth. And that if you sit down to work and you get working on what matters most in your life, whatever that might be, and he says it could be anything. He's pretty open to, but you sit down to do your meaningful work. You are going to, you're going to be miserable, and you have to accept that. But then he does add, but you know what? The more you progress in it, the easier and easier it gets.
It sounded a little bit like the way you talk about anxiety, that if you accept the anxiety and you're willing to experience it, then it kind of goes away. So when you accept resistance and you accept, the possibility of being miserable, and then you dive into the work and do the work, then the resistance and the misery kind of go away, but then they come back when you are ready to engage your work again the next day.
Yeah. And then what makes it easier is essentially order, intensity, and constancy. You have to work in the midst of the resistance, and those processes make your life easier and easier over time as you start getting momentum. So I think in Optimal Work, we talk a lot about work as consisting of order, intensity, constancy, these three ideals. We also talk about ideas like momentum in your work, what it means to get traction, how that builds into momentum. I think he would like all those ideas a lot. Because he says that these ideals, he doesn't use the word, but that's what he's talking about, are what allow us to overcome resistance. That whenever you're overcoming resistance, it's because of these things. And he also adds things like humility, and just being more selfless and adaptable. And he has the right idea that when we're aiming for ideals, then we lean into the resistance, and then, in fact, we find that it gets less and less. But you always have to be committed to the fact that sometimes it's just going to be hard. And if you're not doing this for the comfort, you're doing it to produce your work. And you just have to be so convinced that the work matters. But the other thing that you mentioned that I think is really relevant is that you mentioned this in the beginning, that the resistance itself is a kind of compass, because you only experience it in areas that matter to you. So it's only when there's something at stake that we have resistance, and that kind of makes us want to procrastinate actually doing it. I think that's a good insight.
Yeah, it makes it kind of a mysterious force that the whole world, in a sense, is pointing you in some direction. Because you mentioned that the resistance takes different forms. There's the external with inanimate objects and other people, and even I think we would point to, especially the resistance is internal. That it's in some way yourself, and you're holding yourself back.
He's very clear. Yeah, the resistance, it can seem external, like all these things are just arrayed against you, but in fact, it's always internal. Yeah, and so you have to own it as yours, and then see that. Like, for instance, one of the ways people resist is by creating drama.
Yeah.
But when you're in the midst of creating drama, it feels like the people in your life are all being dramatic and everything. Well, but he's saying, no, you're actually the one creating drama. And so you have to learn to see that drama in your life is just resistance. He even strangely, perhaps, says that wanting to heal yourself is just resistance. Because people they'll view oh, I have these things in my past that I have to somehow process and deal with before I can start working on what matters most. So he says if healing yourself psychologically wasn't putting off the work, it would be great, and it can be. But much of the time, it in fact is that people are just procrastinating. And he says that people think that if they heal their psychological mind, they will then kind of set free their artistic mind. But actually, it's the other way around. That as you are developing your artistic mind, and that's getting healthier and healthier, he kind of promises, will lead to also healing your psychological mind.
Mm.
So do the work. The work heals you, is kind of his point. So, and that's what being a professional means. So being a professional means showing up no matter how you feel to do what needs to be done, to be reliable, to be responsible, and to be totally committed to your work, and have this kind of professional sense to it that you're gonna do this, and that he says resistance hates professionalism like that.
Yeah.
That it wants you to be an amateur, and it wants you to approach all work in your life as an amateur.
I have to say that was great to hear that, because sometimes when I'm talking about OptimalWork, telling other people about OptimalWork, artists will say, "Oh, that's not for me. I need to give myself space for the creativity to come, for the new ideas to come." So it's nice to hear him say, "No, you need order, intensity, and constancy, especially as an artist."
That you had to show up, and then this is where it gets in. Maybe this is what you're asking about. I think I can.
Sure.
I'll let you ask
Go
the
ahead.
question.
Okay.
The Muse.
Yeah. So he attributes a lot of this creativity and this insight to the Muse, which is this kind of impersonal force that maybe everyone has their own muse, and that's what's guiding you. And if you just put in the work and you trust, then the Muse will guide you.
Yeah, this gets into Pressfield's kind of Greek mythology of psychology.
Yeah.
So he does psychology by way of mythology, which is a kind of, maybe you could say it's a right-brained way of doing things. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think you suggested that once when we were talking, that when people talk in metaphors like this and they kind of personify things, that's kind of like what the right brain typically does. The right brain does personify everything. And so to personify resistance and to personify the Muse, as he more or less does in the book, lets us relate to them in a new way. And so, and once you're working on changing your relations with things, that's a very right-brained way of operating. And it allows for people to then be mindful. So that is also an interesting move. So just as he kind of personifies resistance and has a capital R for it, he also personifies the Muse. And whether the Muse is your inner genius, which at one point he talks about, or higher aspects of your true self, which he also talks about, or this kind of superhuman force from heaven, which he also talks about. It's hard to tell, like, what is he talking about when he's talking about. But the key point is it shows up when you show up to work. You have to honor it by giving it space. And if you put in the work and are showing up to do it, the Muse will start to also show up and help you. And it's exactly the opposite of resistance. And so it does everything in precisely the opposite degree. Mm-hmm. So that is an interesting idea that, well, one, inspiration comes not before a task, but during it. So you can't wait to be inspired and then do something, because you'll always be waiting to be inspired, and that's resistance. So it's showing up, putting in the effort, and then you can have these moments where he describes it, where you're lifted up, and for hours you could be working with a sense of inspiration. So, and that's a sign that you're working on what's most important and you're obeying the Muse. So it's hard to say what's the metaphysical reality of what he's talking about, but there's something experiential that I think is right.
Yeah. It's very much of trust the process, and the outcomes kind of fall into place.
Exactly. Yeah. No, he's very into that. He doesn't put it in those words, but that's the spirit of it, is that you have to let the things unfold in their own time. And in order for that to happen, you actually just have to be showing up.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting to be writing a book, you just have to be sitting down every day for a certain amount of time and doing it.
Right. Now, Kevin, do you find this advice valid for everyone? Because whenever I think about, process versus outcome, or follow the path of most resistance, follow your higher calling, it always strikes me okay, I'm not sure I can give this advice to everyone. Maybe it's irresponsible if I don't know a certain person's particular situation that maybe it's bad advice for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. How do you know what you're encouraging when you're encouraging
Yeah,
this? And
yeah,
how does he have such confidence to tell people to go create your thing, and
yeah,
and like the world will be made more whole by it?
yeah.
Like, where does that kind of confidence come from? That somehow this
Mhm.
is all ordered. Like, are all muses good? So
Yeah.
this is actually something that happens in IFS as well, internal family systems. Where
Uh-huh.
there's this um, total trust in the absolute goodness of the true self.
Mhm.
And Pressfield has the same thing. That he has this total trust in the goodness of the muse, and that the process will always be a good one
Mhm.
that will help you. Now, maybe the closest I come to that is that I've never seen anyone misled by ideals.
Mm.
So if you think of the muses as really your envisioning of various ideals, and I think it's ideals ultimately that inspire us. And ideals in some way speak to us, and they call us to go higher. And they can chastise us. So when we haven't really been true to an ideal. So to me, that all of that sense, I've never seen anything bad come from people trying to be more loving or trying to be more wise or understanding or patient. So I do think that it's the nature of ideals that they can't be used for ill.
Mhm.
And that's a classical part of the Thomistic Aristotelian understanding of virtue, is that they actually can't be used for ill in their kind of in their full form. So that's the closest I would come to it. But I do think
Yeah.
that we are capable of this, and so helping people to clarify their ideals and to commit to them, I never have second thoughts about.
Mhm.
But telling them to just obey the creative muse and write down
Yeah.
whatever comes to mind, that's a
Yeah.
little, I don't know, I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah. Wonder how many people would be tempted to quit their jobs, based on that, where they're it could be
Yeah.
dangerous.
Well, and Pressfield himself quit his job. He was,
Uh-huh.
in advertising in New York City, and then like traveled around the country for 30 years as doing odd jobs, intending to write and carrying a typewriter with him the whole time, but never using it
Mhm.
once.
Hmm.
Kind of getting ready to write his book. Um, but he's actually like a famous novelist now.
Yeah.
He started writing when he was 55 years old, and he's now written, I think, 20 books, which is incredible.
Mhm.
And he overcame his resistance. And then he's written this book, this funny little book of, the War of Art that has helped, like Rich Roll in his podcast said, this book has helped me more than any human has ever helped me in my life.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who was again, he also had all of his problems. And then he became this ultra marathon Ironman guy, and wrote a book too, Finding Ultra. So it's interesting that like this Pressfield book it marked, you could say, like a real change in his life, writing it down, and then it sparked all these other people to
Mhm.
have just remarkable changes in their life. So I
Yeah.
think that I have a lot of respect for people that can help others to grow like that. I just think
Yeah.
it's impressive to see if you can help people to that extent. So I'm willing to give him a little bit of license when it comes to Greek mythology of psychology.
Yeah. Yeah, you can definitely tell that what he's writing about, he's trying to capture this very real transformation in his
Yeah,
own life. Uh,
yeah, and it's true in his life. Like everything
yeah.
he talks about his own life, and so you can see that. In fact, yeah, he had resistance for like 30 years, and it
Yeah.
ruined everything. And eventually, he learned how to overcome it, and was
Yeah.
kind of guided by his muse.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like his broad perspective that he's not just focused on art. It is called the War of Art, but
Mhm.
he's talks about, entrepreneurial pursuits and especially this, self improvement and trying to
Yeah,
grow according to ideals. He
yeah,
applies the concept of resistance there as well.
yeah.
So,
Exactly, and even that the height of growing in all these things is the
mhm,
bonds, is the developing the connections in life with others.
mhm,
So when people can like see that ultimately, as you overcome resistance, what that really means is growing in ideals and bonds in your life, I think that they're on the right road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Kevin. I think that's a great note for us to end on then.
All right. Great. Thank you, Sharif.
Okay. All right. We'll be back next week.